talk about today is about what happens after you die. So, in Buddhism, there's a certain definition of death, like the moment you are dead, which is not really fitting with the definition of clinical death. So, um, in medicine, what is considered to be the moment of death is when the brain stops functioning, so brain dead, right? Um, Earlier, it was in medical history that the heart stopped functioning, then your heart cardiac arrest was death, and then they shifted it to the brain stopping to function, um, which has to do with the fact that your heart can stop functioning and it can be brought back to life, but that's much harder to do with the brain. After the brain goes, like stops sending out signals, it's basically you've reached the point of no return. That is not the definition of death in Buddhism. The definition of death in Buddhism has to do with what happens to the energy bodies. And so in the dying process, we were talking about the dissolution of the elements, and we didn't go into details of all the different um, mind states that dissolve at within these different dissolution. So there are first the dissolution of the elements, and then as the mind element dissolves, there are subcategories of mental states or mental capacities that dissolve, and it gets more and more and more subtle all the time as you go through the period of the white appearance part of the dissolution, the red appearance part of the dissolution, and then the black. So it gets finer, 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 the mental states that dissolve. And then you reach this last point where the finest of mental states, which are called winds, in so I'm talking from the Tibetan point of view. So their winds are called lung, that literally means air or wind, dissolve. And the only kind of mind that stays and that hasn't dissolved and that cannot dissolve is the so-called innermost subtle mind. That is the part of the mind that we have that cannot move. I shouldn't say it like that, but it's completely stable, immutable. There's no change to its state. It's the foundation of everything else, every kind of thought, concept, idea, or whatever we might have. And as such, it is free of all dualistic thinking or of all conceptuality. So basically, all the mind states that dissolve leading up to that last moment that is death in the Buddhist point of view, and death is also a process, everything that dissolves are all the conceptual states of mind that have to do with a kind of um, dialectical thinking, a kind of conceptuality. And it goes from the grosser most to the subtlest. And then once that dissolves, you're left with a so-called innermost subtle mind. And at that moment, from the Buddhist point of view, you've entered the point of death, which is still more, because it's not a final point. It's not like you're alive and then you're dead. According to Buddhism, because you never really die. You just drop your body and then you're in the intermediate, alive in the intermediate state, and then you take rebirth and you're alive in a new body. You're just changing forms of life. So the idea about death is really different. I want to say in this context, because most of you are not born Buddhists, I would like to say that reincarnation was a concept also in the Christian church up to the 1100s, when some pope at some council decided that it was no longer church doctrine. And you wonder how one person can suddenly decide such a thing. It's like, huh? Excuse me? Yeah, you're sitting on the throne of Peter, but this is kind of a big thing to change just nilly-willy. Mm. And also, mystic Judaism has this idea that you can be reborn. So this was very much a concept that was shared throughout many cultures. The idea that, when you die on the outside, your body stops functioning, that you're neither gone nor dead, but that you live on in a state of pure energy. So after we've gone through that whole dissolution of death and we've reached this point where we're the so-called innermost subtle mind, that innermost subtle mind is seated at the heart. And when a person is in that state, so most of you are not around dead bodies much, but maybe you have a bird die in your garden, you can actually sense it as some kind of heat sensation over the heart area of the person or animal. And then, depending on the person can stay in this state, which is a thought-free kind of meditation, for a very long time. Days, weeks, months. Now, this does not happen to ordinary people, as in ever. It only happens to highly trained yogis and yoginis who spend their whole life training to stay in that state at that moment as a form of most powerful meditation. For ordinary people, it will whisk by. They may be unconscious and not even notice it. So the reason why we meditate, why we do yogic practices leading up to death, is to be prepared for that very moment. I mean, you can say that in a nutshell, we are Buddhists to prepare for the moment of death. And then, of course, everybody runs around being Buddhist, doing everything else except preparing for the moment of death, So, as in we talked about last week, instead you run around and accuse others of having caused a certain karma, creating the negative karma of accusing other people, So that's not how to be a Buddhist. I keep on saying, I like it, the word Buddhist in Tibetan, Nangpa, means insider. It means somebody who goes inside. So stop pointing the finger outside. That's not being a Buddhist. Being a Buddhist means you take care of your own mind for what? For the moment of death, for that moment. Why? Because whatever happens after that one moment determines your future rebirth. And how much would you like to be reborn as a little mouse that gets fed to a hungry snake in a zoo store, or whatever else of a horrible existence you could imagine, So out of pure selfishness and self-care, you should be concerned about that moment. For an untrained person, which we are, so I'm not going to go into what happens if you're a great yogi or yogini, because to the best of my knowledge, nobody here is. This moment will go by like that. You will not have control in that moment. And your winds will start to stir again. That's what the text says. So wind here means mind. So very much it is like you were in deep, dreamless sleep, and you go back into the phase where you're dreaming, and the dreams arise out of control, right? These things happen to you, you're in a dream body, you feel like you're hovering around and all of those things. So it's parallel to that. There are a lot of parallels to what's called arising in the Bardo and being in the sleep and dream phase. So your mind starts to stir because it is not trained to stay still, and concepts form, and you find yourself outside of your body in an energy body, like a little cloud that's hovering around. And depending on the imprints you've gathered in your mind, means these moments of karma we've been talking about, you will have appearances, experiences come to your mind according to what you did. So you did horrible things, you'll have horrible images come to you and experiences. You did nice things, you'll have nice things come to you. It's kind of like that. I want to say on that note that Hitler was known to have the worst of nightmares, every single night, waking up screaming again and again. And the generals who had to travel around with him were like totally at their ends wits end, because they all had to sleep in the same room, and they were constantly like disturbed in their sleep because Hitler would wake up screaming. So don't be like Hitler, don't kill millions of people already before that. You may have nightmares, and you may have a nightmarish in-between state. So in-between state means between that moment of death and between your next rebirth. So par in Tibetan language actually means in between. So in old-fashioned English, you would say twixt, right? So in between. So so if you want to say, can I sit between you two? Then you would say, could I sit par you two? That's literally what it means, even in modern Tibetan, that word. So it's that thing, that time span, that existence that comes between two bodily incarnated lives. And to, so par means, so it sounds funny the way I'm saying it, because both of these syllables in Tibetan language, which is a tonal language, is a low tone syllable. That's why it sounds funny. Yeah. So it's linguistically a so-called semi-tonal language, Tibetan. So so you will have heard it called Bardo, which that's what people say you don't understand, but the Tibetans say, if you say to them Bao, they'll be what? So they say it parto. So, and the second syllable to just makes it a noun. So intermediate state. If you say par, just means it just means in between. And so you arise in that experience of being this out of body floating cloud. And first of all, you experience that you're no longer bound to a physical body, and you feel light and floaty. And you experience that you can move very fast. You think you're over there, and you are over there, exactly like in a dream. You think of the place where you were born, and you're in the place where you were born. You think about your friend, you're where your friend is. So you travel at the speed of thought, and you can pass through walls and physical objects because you do not have a physical body. So we all know that ghosts pass through walls, no problem. So you are technically speaking not a ghost. However, for all good purposes, you are like a ghost, right? So in the Tibetan Indian worldview, if you're a real ghost, you take birth as a ghost at the end of the Bardo, and we'll get to that. For now, you're a Bardoa, means a being in the Bardo, Bardoa. So, and you can pass through walls, you can move at lightning speed. I mean, distance doesn't matter. You are transported there by thought. You can read other people's mind via telepathy. And you can also, language is no longer a barrier because you are communicating on the level of telepathy, on the level of meaning beyond language. So you can help any Paroa if you only speak English, because they will understand the meaning of what you're saying. I think sometimes this is a little bit of a dull example, but it's a little bit like when you talk to your dog or cat, right? They kind of get what you mean, though they may not understand the words, right? This is a fancier version of that, where they just really know, which is kind of like reading people's thoughts. There's a direct transmission of meaning outside of a particular language and grammar and words. Um, um, all of that, when you first die, can throw you off a lot. A lot of people don't realize they died. You know, they may have had their heart stop in the middle of their sleep. They may have had an accident. They may have had not even seen the car coming that hit them, or whatever it may be. They may not know somebody was shooting at them, and suddenly they're floaty and they don't know what happened, right? So there can be a phase of tremendous confusion of like, why is my body lying there? Why can't I get back in? So there can be a real struggle of saying like, I want to go back into my body, because that's what we do when we're waking up in the morning. So at the night, the energy body floats out of the physical body. We're in that floaty realm. And then there's this moment when, if you're awake or you are conscious while you're dreaming, there is a moment when you feel like you're blind and you can't move properly, and you feel a little bit paralyzed, or you feel yourself sinking and becoming heavy again. That's as you're going back into the physical body before you actually wake up, those kind of symptoms. So the Paroa has spent a whole lifetime and lifetimes floating out at night during sleep and coming back into the body. It's like, why can't I get back? Right? There may be a total confusion, like what happened. There may be anger and unwillingness. Hey, wait a minute, I didn't want to be dead, you know? There may be a lot of upset around what's happening around the deathbed. There may be hated in-laws. The in-laws may be screaming and shouting. There may be nasty things said. There may be all kinds of things, right? And it can be from you're dying in surgery and the surgeons are either saying mean things about you. And I'm saying that because I studied medicine. I've been in the surgical theaters and they do say mean things about you, like horrible things. Or it can be that the surgeon is flipping out. Maybe it's a kind surgeon, not saying bad things, but like freaking out, like, oh my God, the heart stopped. Everybody start rushing. And the person in the Bardo is like, what's the trouble? I'm fine, you know? There can be all kind of disconnect in that moment. It's a very crazy time, or you know, like your wife or husband starts crying hysterically, and you're like trying to say, honey, it's okay, I'm fine, but you can't anymore. And you're like, damn, why can't I get my message across? You know, why can't I hug you and say, don't cry for me, I'm fine, you know? So it's, I think, the probably most difficult moment. And because of that, in Buddhist culture, there are a bunch of rules of conduct for that initial period when somebody dies. That is to help them. So this is like basically where you are the birthing the person across the bridge into the Bardo state. So first is like the room where somebody is dying is supposed to be quiet. People are not allowed to cry and scream and cling to the body and scream, don't go. And all this is like, because you're not supposed to be selfish and say, don't go, but you're supposed to focus and consider the other person, saying like, hell, they are leaving their body now and they're going. It's a very dangerous step, and I hope I'll talk about it, because the moment you lose, you exit your body, you're at the mercy of the winds of karma. And I hope, remind me if I forgot to go back to that point. So, but you're supposed to be very quiet. It's supposed to be a very spiritual atmosphere, and you're supposed to be helping the person to lift out of their body, go. And then, because you know, once they've died, they telepathically know what you're thinking. Think only good things about the person, think helpful things, and think things like, we're all right, we'll take care of all of your affairs, we'll carry out your testament and you will the way you wanted. Um, you know, don't be upset, we'll be okay without you. You just take care and you go on towards. And then now, I mean, it depends on what their spiritual practice is, right? So even within Buddhism, depending on what your personal practice was, you would help them in different ways. And if the person is a different confession, then you have to go, then you have to say like, the angels are coming to get you and you're going to God or whatever, right? So like, for instance, when some of you know Venerable Pynsok, when his mom died, um, he freaked out because he was so affected. So he just called me. He couldn't even say anything. He just said, and I was like, what? You know, and I think he must have managed to say, my mom's dying, right? So I started to tell him what to say and think, because he was losing it. He was too close to that person, right? And she was Haitian. So her belief, her entire spiritual practice had been to pray to Ti Jésus. That means Petit Jésus means little Jesus baby, right? So I said, well, you tell her to go home to Jesus, you know, to Ti Jésus. So don't start to, at that moment, put a Buddhist trip on a person who's not a Buddhist. That's not even kind. That's just unskillful, you know. So you have to therefore know a little bit about the person to be truly, truly helpful. And so in the end, the most important thing is to just be compassionate, be there and kind of like hold them energetically, you know, like Mindy, you're a therapist, like you're holding, we say you hold the space for the person. So you have to hold the space for the person who's dying and forget about yourself. It doesn't matter how you're feeling and all of that. You have to just put that to the back burner. And so that's not where everything ends with the upset for the Bardoa. So they may spend a couple of days, you know, not understanding why they can't re-enter their body. So in a hot climate, it may have to be burned very fast. In colder climates, not. Nowadays, they wind up in freezer chests up to months until the families had the chance to have everybody fly in from all over the planet, whatever. Um, so they may really suffer from knowing that their body is there. So you have to talk to them in your mind, or now think it's your body, and it's there in the morgue somewhere. You have to tell yourself, it's like, it's okay. It's like, it's no longer my body and I need to let go of it now. And you may be very upset to think about all of the possessions you're leaving behind, right? So it's good Buddhist practice already now to think about, what am I attached to? Make a will. Be clear how you're going to let go of it, so you don't have to sort that out when you've died, after you've died. What the hell is going to happen with my stuff now, right? So it's very important to be clear about that ahead of time. And one thing that Buddhists will do also is they will, this is from a simpler culture, right, where people didn't really have personal possessions out of the clothes they wore on their body, right? The whole rest was family possessions. You didn't really have your table, your chair, your bed. It was automatically like part of the family possession. So they would fairly quickly ask a poor person to wash all the clothes, dry them, fold them, and give them away to charity. That means find poor people and give away the clothes. And the reason was twofold. First of all, to create good karma that was then dedicated for the person in the Bardo, saying, hey, we just created good karma, and that good energies for you to go on into a good next life and rebirth. And secondly, it was so the person in the Bardo would see, oops, my clothes are gone. They already belong to somebody else now. It was like cutting off your attachment to your possessions. And this is one of the biggest obstacles in the Bardo. If you're like sitting there the whole time worrying about what's going to happen to your apartment or your dog or your Tesla or your children or whatever, right? So it's very important to clarify that ahead of time. And again, I told fairy tales after last time, but we also have traditional fairy tales about, for instance, the one is about a young queen who just had a baby, and the wicked other woman who's jealous and wants to be queen instead of her, as she just gave birth, pours her a bath that's too hot and puts her in there and basically suffocates and burns her in the bath to kill her. And then the fairy tale is about, for 3 nights, how she comes back to her baby, as the Bardo in the energy body saying, I'm here to look after my baby. How's my baby? How's everything? So this is one of the biggest things that holds people, is the worry about their loved ones, especially little children, right? So if you have somebody die where there is, for instance, a baby that's left behind, the most important thing is to constantly communicate to that person by way of thought. Even if you don't see them, you don't sense them, always say like, we're taking care of the baby. The baby will be fine. So-and-so is totally responsible. We're taking good care of the child. You can go on. You can move on, because they can't stay behind for another 20 years until the baby has grown, right? So then another obstacle at that point is that the Pardoa, you just came out of a lifetime of eating. So you have an energy body. You don't need food, but you're in a habit of having food. So you wind up being hungry, which is just actually a mental habit at that point, because you don't even have a stomach, right? And so the only thing you can eat is smell. So I actually really liked Lama Zopa Rinpoche's translation of that, which he I mean, the technical word is like in English, chima is smell, but he called it aroma because that sounds delicious, right? Smell could also be stink, like foul smell. So the person in the intermediate state is hungry and is craving something, and offering them stink, say, why don't you go to the latrine? That's not the point. That won't work. So it's like offering them aroma. And that's part of the Indian and Tibetan traditions, then, to do different fire pujas to create aroma, mostly of roasted grains that, essentially like toast. It's like you get up in the mornings and you come to breakfast and it smells like coffee with toast, right? That's roasted aroma. So something like that. So that is a very, very good thing to do then, to help the people in the Bardo to not be so stressed out for food that they don't need, but they haven't gotten used to it yet. So that's something they would do. They would do these offerings 3 times a day if somebody passed. So then also, just because I mean, nowadays people live so far away because you are on the other side of the planet or on a different continent, there is no problem because you can help them in the intermediate state and in passing, no matter what the distance, because they can move at will of thought. They just have to think about you and they'll be there. And you can think of them, and that makes them be there with you in the space of thought. And telepathically, they'll understand. So, um, yeah. And again, it's like no matter where you are, they can pass through everything. Just a story that I just comes to my mind is that one of my friends said she had gone to the hospital and seen her father one last time, because he was on his deathbed, and then she left the ward, and the ward was long, and she walked out to the ward and stood by the elevators for a long time. It took quite a while for the elevator to come, and she said it was like suddenly I felt like he was following me, and he was standing there, and he got in the elevator with me, and he went down the elevator with me. And when this is before cell phones, when she got home, the hospital had called, left a message saying he passed. Basically, he passed the minute she left the ward. So he left his body and came to see her out of the hospital, and was with her in the elevator. And I had a similar experience with that when my godfather died, and I had to leave and pass the house in front of his house and fence for the last time. He was standing at the fence. His energy body was by the fence to see me leave, you know, last time in that life. Well, it was technically speaking, he was already in the Pardo, but with him still having that identity. So this is the time when the Pardoa still remembers the old identity. This is the time when you'll still react when somebody calls you saying Sam or Lauren, right? When you'll still think you're a woman or a man, when you, yeah, still have not forgotten that experience. But depending on how strong the karma is for you to go on, that can wear out very fast, and you'll morph into somebody else with a different identity. And it can even be that after you arise from that moment of having dissolved into the innermost subtle mind, you arise and you'll already be gone into another existence and mental inner reality and world. So what I'm describing is kind of an average good person with a peaceful death and a peaceful transition. Then these things can happen. So there can be a huge I mean, scope is not even extreme opposites in experience of what happens at that point. So it's difficult to cover them all quickly in one class. So I want to go back to the idea of last class where we talked about karma. And I said the point is to be a good person. So you're consistently trying to accumulate a little bit more good rather than bad karma because it accumulates, and the power of habit, you need it for that moment. You need it. It's like, when you push a ball, that the impetus, the power of goodness pushes you into a peaceful bardo with a clear state where you can remember your practice and make good choices for yourself. If you've done very extreme deeds, good or bad, it can create a kind of karma that can ripen at the time of death. That's called it's called a throwing karma. A throwing karma means you're totally out of control. It throws you wherever it is. So if you do a massively great, amazing deed, it will, without your control, throw you into a good rebirth where you're very happy, you have good conditions, you're rich, healthy, beautiful, well-liked, rich, and all the rest, right? Great. That is okay. But what if it's a really big negative deed that ripens in that moment and really throws you um, into a horrible existence where you have these kind of hellish experiences like the worst nightmare or the kind of mental reality that in cultures all across the board has been described as hell or hellish, right? So you don't want to go there. And you won't, if the karma is really bad and it ripens powerfully, at that moment, you'll be out of control. You cannot control it. And you can feel it. If you accompany people across death, you will feel it. You will afterwards suddenly get a sense of bliss, serenity, lightness, and all of that. Or like your hairs will be standing on end, because you feel something really creepy. So this is no joke. And it's also out of that experience, then coupled with yogic clairvoyance, that these teachings came into being. So there's also depends on your karma, on what kind of an energy body you arise in. So if you've accumulated good karma and you're headed for good rebirth or so-called upper realms, you will have a bright energy body. I mean, one that emits light, that looks white and luminous. If you've accumulated bad karma, that ripens in that moment, and because we don't know which karma ripens when, it may be bad karma from some other lifetime, like 10 or 100 lifetimes ago, then you can arise in an energy body that's headed for a bad rebirth, and it will be non-luminous, so it will look like a shadow, an absence of light instead of something luminous. And there's the whole gamut. And the ones, it is said that the Bardo bodies, the Bardoas that are going up in rebirth to a higher rebirth, travel, float around with their head up. And the dark ones that are headed downwards to a lower rebirth are dark and with a head down. When I first heard that, I was like, that sounds so stupid. I can't even believe it, until actually one of my neighbors died. And I later heard, so I was praying for him and I saw him as I was trying to pray for him and help him. I saw him upside down and I was like, that unfortunately sounds familiar. in the wrong way, So, and then later I talked to the woman who was with him last, and she said that he had been extremely angry and upset the last days before he passed. So, and I know that he could get into, rampages about this is so bad and so bad and this is such a bad thing in politics. And so this is why you're supposed to be passing with a peaceful mind and not full of rage. Um, so that was a confirmation for me that maybe I wasn't making it up to see him upside down, which I would have also never thought of doing. And I've prayed for people and accompanied them and seen them as a mix of like and light and dark and all kinds of things. I've also accompanied people, who killed themselves, like who shot themselves out of despair. That can be very creepy, trying to, pray for them at that moment because they're in a completely freaked out state of mind. I've also gotten very strange. I remember one person, a woman who had a really good life, and she was a human rights activist and all kinds of things. But I don't know the circumstances of her death at all. But when I prayed for her, I got a very strange, like bad feeling. She was not spiritual, she was just an average good person. And there's also the phenomenon of that if you don't actively create new good karma, which is like putting money in your bank account for the future for interest, that you can have a very nice life and use up all your good karma. And then when you die, there's nothing good left. And you have to then experience the negative karma. That's the only thing that's left. It's like you've used up all your money and then you die and all that's left is your debt, right? And they even talk about karmic debt, what you owe others. So how you experience that moment in the Bardo is can be so vastly different. Then also how long you're going to stay in the Bardo. It, it can be from literally a split second. So if you have a throwing karma, a very strong karma, it will be very fast to a maximum of 49 days. That's also one of those things where I'm like, hey, you Indo-Tibetans, you're very fancy. How did you come up with that number? And I'll tell you, 49 is 7 times 7. They say that in the Bardo, you're alive as that being for 7 days, and then you die in the Bardo, which is a terrible experience, and then you have another 7 days. Most people don't reach there, and that's repeated a maximum of 7 times over. By that time, you have to have found a rebirth. The rebirth needs to match the karma that has ripened. So as you're going through death and the death dissolution, which is why that transition is so important, whatever seeds you can nurture in that moment, karmic seeds will ripen and determine your next rebirth. So let's say you have a rebirth to be reborn as a human being in a good family, in a good country. But then there is no such a rebirth available at that time. Within 7 days, then you have to die in the Bardo and you have another 7 days. So let me make an easy example. So they say that if you have the karma, say, to be reborn as a well taken care of beloved family dog, and there are just no puppies, fertilized available in that period, that if you can't find a womb with a puppy in it, in that moment, that will be your next body, that at the end of that, you will have to go at the end of the 49 days to the next best similar rebirth, which is something like a coyote or a wolf or fox or something like that, right? So there is such a thing that happened in recent history. So, for instance, when the Chinese invaded, they immediately started to kill the Tibetans and have not really stopped trying their very, very best to cause a genocide. So, at that moment, in the 1950s, 60s, a lot of Tibetans got killed. And because they were very attached to the Tibetan culture and they were practicing Buddhists, Tibetan Buddhists, they had a lot of propensities and imprints to have a rebirth as a Tibetan Buddhist. But because of the attempted genocide by the Chinese, there were very, very few Tibetan rebirths available, right? So there were a lot of karmic Tibetan people with Tibetan Buddhist karmic imprints killed in the Bardo, and almost no placement for a new rebirth as a Tibetan in Tibet available. So what happens then? You need to take rebirths somewhere else. Fast forward 20 years and you have a whole generation of hippies from everywhere else in the world who then go like, whoa, we want to be Tibetan Buddhists. Welcome the lamas, right? And then there's this weird cognitive dissonance where then the Tibetan lamas are saying, well, we teach you all these Bardo teachings, but unless you're born a Tibetan, it doesn't count, right? I've only heard one more enlightened Lama say, well, yeah, of course, everybody who got killed there at that time as a Tibetan and couldn't be reborn in Tibet, they got reborn in the West and they're Western Buddhists now. But we don't qualify, we're not part of the Tibetan family because we don't have the Tibetan bodies. We only have the Tibetan souls, if I may call them souls, just for one moment. So, this is just something to consider, at least for my generation of Buddhists. But the genocide is also ongoing. So that's this thing about the 49 days in the Bardo. Most people go through the Bardo within 3 to 5 days. It's very short, right? So, and when you ask, most people feel the presence of their loved ones who passed for very few days after the actual death, and then they seem to not come into their presence, you know, these apparitions of the deceased kind of experiences also cease. So what else did I want to talk about? Yes. So there's also another thing you have to prepare for the moment of death is that there's, you know, Tibetan Buddhism has endless amounts of lists in the Abhidharma scripture teachings, like the 13 types of patience and the whatever many classifications of sufferings. So one thing I want to tell you about, and it's not an excuse for being a bad teacher, but one of the specific patience is the patience to listen to the Dharma again and again, to listen deeper to the meaning and not say, oh, I already heard teachings on karma. I don't need to hear that again, but to hear again more carefully, to deepen your experience and understanding, particularly of the teachings on emptiness. And similarly, in the long rundown on teachings on suffering. There's one particular suffering that is the just to give you an flavor of the kinds of suffering are that discussed is like the suffering of losing your youthful look, you know? Like we don't really, you're all older than 16. We don't really know how good it feels to look 16 because we just take it for granted. And then you're 30 or 50 or 80, and then you have the suffering of no longer looking 16, you know? So, but there's also the particular suffering of dying that's explained as the suffering of feeling your life force running out. So, like all of these things, you're not supposed to just sit here and, oh, yeah, Julia, she's talking. Whatever I'm saying that's supposed to become part of your meditations and your contemplating meditations. So, for instance, to take time every now and then for the rest of your life to imagine, like vividly, what it would feel like if you just had part of your body ripped open so the blood runs out and you literally feel your life force running away and it just seeps away and you can't stop it, and boom, you're dead, you know? So you're not so shocked and taken by surprise when it happens because you're not supposed to be distracted from the actual task, which is to get yourself to the other side of the Bardo, which into a good rebirth, where you can continue to be a good person and a spiritual practitioner. So the problem is that this moment where you're dissolving to being just a being that is the innermost subtle mind, the moment the winds start to stir again, you're at, so the scriptures say you're at the mercy of your winds of karma, of the winds of karma. And here, you're not supposed to think of the winds of karma as something nice, but like rough breezes and storms out on the open ocean. It's like, oh shit, what am I going to do now? You know, I cannot control this because unless you're a very highly accomplished yogi or yogini, you will not be able to control whatever winds, means mental states and experiences are arising in that moment. And you know, people always say, like, yeah, but Dr. Raymond Moody, he interviewed all these people, you know, who clinically died and came back. I mean, first of all, there's a big debate whether these people actually passed that death threshold. And basically, the lamas say no, otherwise, they wouldn't have come back. They just went to the point of somewhere in the dissolution and then came back. But some of them, and they get kind of edited out in the interview part, some of them have really hellish experiences. It's terrifying for them. They didn't see the light and, you know, this big loving light that was all forgiving. They had really, really terrifying experiences. And the point is to be a good person and to do good deeds, to accumulate good merit and karma, to get to that point in a way that it's peaceful. Your mind has a peaceful experience at that moment. So you can peaceful, calm enough to say, oh, I'm in the Bardo now. Don't be attached to all the gold and silver and bank accounts and whatever you may leave behind. Let go of that. Let me focus on where I'm going and have peaceful, prayerful thoughts about that and try to find a peaceful, good rebirth for my next life. And it's not like you can go around and you know, it's not like you will be in a supermarket saying, would I like this mom and dad or this mom and dad? It's not like that, right? So that would be nice. And I mean, Buddhism doesn't say anything like what the New Age says, that you're sitting on a cloud, you know, choosing your parents and this whole like, oh, I chose my parents. Buddhism doesn't say anything like that. I already said it's more like the wind of karma, the force of your karma will force and push you somewhere, and you'll most likely not be able to control it at all. They say in the Bardo, because you've shed the restraints of your physical body and the physical brain, you have full memory of all the Dharma you studied. So then if in the Bardo you say, oh, let me remember what I studied, or oh, let me recite the prayers I remember, or whatever, then you can control it a lot more. But you have to be a practitioner in order to do that, which is where you're supposed to be a practitioner. And you may have trained in certain practices that have visualizations exactly for that time. So you're supposed to, but it's only useful if you're going to remember. So if you're arising in the Bardo and your negative karma is so strong that you're in a completely deluded psychotic-like state, then you won't remember those things. Again, the impetus there, you have to be in such a habit that, you feel like, oh, 6 p.m. in the Bardo, time for my evening meditation, and then it's like, then you have a good chance. So the way Buddhism says we take rebirth is not exactly glorious, right? Because they don't think being a human being is so great. They think that being a human being is the middle point between great and horrible. A pretty even mix between having pleasurable and suffering experiences, which gives us the right mix for being good practitioners, because we suffer all the time, so we're motivated, we want things to be better, but we're not suffering so much so we can actually still sit down and meditate or practice. So if you've worked with truly psychotic people, there's no way they can practice, or it's kind of tough to get an animal to practice, so we have a good kind of an existence to do so. And where did I want to go with that? All right, so how we're taking rebirth. I've said that before in the karma class, it's almost like repetition compulsion. So they say that while you're in the Bardo, that you see two, I have to say, beings have sex. I have to say beings because it's humans or animals, whatever. And because of how your mind is, and it can be deluded in that moment, depending on the karma that's happening, you think that looks like fun. And you're attracted and you want to get closer to be part of that fun. And then it's almost like, a moth getting stuck on that thing you put out to catch moths. And you get stuck to the ovum and the sperm that merge in that moment, and you're stuck to it and you can't get back out. And that exact moment is when the Bardo ends and your next rebirth starts. So, and they say because of that attraction thing, that if you're reborn as a girl, it's you got attracted to your father in that moment. If you're reborn as a boy, you got attracted to your mother in that lifetime. That sounds very Freudian. I don't think it means that at all, because I think it's very clearly understood that you haven't studied perception yet, right? So in the Bardo, it doesn't mean you perceive what is happening there, let's say between two mating dogs, in the way I would see it now. You see it according to whatever delusional, dreamy, drug-like mind state your mind is in that moment. So you perceive something that looks like pleasure and you grasp at it. So the cause for taking rebirth is pleasure and grasping in that moment. And then boom, you're stuck and you can't get back out, which is also about the whole debate of like what is a human being, and that Buddhism is very clear from the moment of conception, you're a human being. I'm just saying that because some people say after X amount of weeks or days or whatever, before that, it's just a lump of cells and not a human being. So for Buddhism, that's the moment when you are the next human being, no matter how many cells or what shape. I mean, if you're reborn human, or, if you're reborn a cow, then it's the next cow. So, and that is the end of the Bardo. Um, so maybe I should open up for questions at this point. There's still something else I want to talk about, but yeah, do you have questions up to this point? Yeah, Lauren?
Um, I feel I don't have the question perfectly formed, but I'm thinking a little bit about the illusory body, like working with the illusory body, and it sounds a lot like this is the body that one takes in the rebirth. Is this something we work with as practitioners as well in the illusory body form now?
Yeah. In this class, because of who's attending, I'm only talking about open teaching level, right? So that's what I want to say to that. Yeah. Mhm. Um, yeah, so if this doesn't sound glorious, it's not supposed to sound glorious. You're supposed to be scared shitless of the Bardo. That's the whole point, because it's supposed to be so scary that you say, holy macaroni, I better sit down and practice. I better give all my gold to the temple, you know? So that's what it's supposed to do. Yeah, Michelle?
Um, when you said it's like 3 to 5 days in the Bardo for most, is that 3 to 5 days for the living person or for the Bardoa? I
Mhm.
would assume time is a bit different in that
Yeah.
state.
Yes. That's a very good question. I've never heard it to be elaborated in that way. My understanding that it is for our time sense, because we're the ones who are supposed to do the pujas every seventh day, right? So that's my assumption. And your assumption that the time, the experience of time. So coming back to the point that actually when you look at all of these Buddhist teachings, that they line up very nicely with relativity theory and quantum physics. Yes, the moment you leave this kind of a body, you're in a very different and much more fluent time-space continuum and experience. Yeah. And like if people die suddenly, such as getting shot or executed, or especially if it comes by surprise in a car accident and stuff, it can all go very fast. It can all go very fast. So actually dying of old age at home in your own bed with a kind of knowing death is coming and saying your last words and stuff, the way it was traditionally done is no doubt the very best and is what people used to know. And I'm very mad at the medical establishment. I mean, they take everything from us, birth and death and everything, that people now feel like they don't know. I mean, sorry, Homo sapiens has been around for 300,000 years, and now supposedly we're not allowed, or we don't know how to die unless we're in an intensive care unit. And you have to have, you know, um, tubes in every single orifice, otherwise you can't die. So I just want to tell you the story. It just happened. A friend of mine from choir, she had flown to where her mother is. She doesn't live here because the mother had felt, and she was old and her state had been degenerating. She was living with a sister, and it was clear death is not so far away. And so she had flown there before Christmas, and they didn't know until in retrospect. Very often the person declines. And then there's one last, you come back even for a day, or maybe 2 days, where the person seems really well, the energy is back, clarity of mind, everything, and then death comes. So she was there for Christmas, and the mother was doing amazing and participating in everything, chatting, accepting and unwrapping gifts, being happy and everything. And after Christmas, she flew home, and the next day the mother was dead. But the mother had fully participated. She had said her last well wishes. She had given her last hugs. She had given away whatever she already wanted to give away. And there you have this wisdom from old people who say things. There's a saying in German, better to give from a warm hand than from a cold hand. So this doesn't talk about winter. It says, I should better give away the things that are dear to me, like my gold rings or pearl necklaces. As I'm feeling death approach, I'd better say, here, you have it. I want to give it to you, than to hold on to it until I'm dead, and then I have no more control, and whoever gets there first will grab it, and run with it. So, and that's why you have a lot of these teachings in Buddhism, in the so-called lower teachings that nobody's interested in because they're lower, that are preparing you for death, which is kind of like the highest. So you'll hear me say this all the time, that Westerners always skip the lowest because they think they're the highest. And then the whole thing falls apart, because it's like trying to build a 10-story building without a basement, without a foundation, without the first, second, third, fourth, and so on floors. That's not going to work either. So what you're supposed to think about a lot is that there's nothing you can take across the threshold of death. None of your possessions, not even one stupid advertisement ballpoint pen you took at the bank. So, I mean, the classical example is you can't even take one sewing needle, right? I mean, you're so attached, to your hair, and then it falls out. Oh my God, I'm losing my hair. You can't even take one hair across. It all has to stay behind. Yeah, again, do you have any questions about whatever we've said so far? Wendy?
Thank you, Julia. You mentioned near-death experiences and controversy there. I had an experience maybe 2 months ago where I lost consciousness at the doctor, and I had a series of bad dreams, images, all these things come up, and I was only unconscious for maybe a few seconds. Are there any experiences that approximate the Bardo state, or is it just it seems similar because I've experienced it recently?
Yeah. So if you're asking, does this mean because it happened when I passed out that I'll have similar images in the Bardo? If that's what you're asking, I've never heard a statement like that. Because it can change. Maybe it was because you were sick in that moment, because the mind rests on the body, and you can have nightmares from the fact that you're having a fever or fighting a cold. So, so that I've never heard. Of course, they say look at your mind. So they say your physical body is the result of your past karma. because it ripened. The moment I was conceived, there was certain DNA and it determined, my looks, like blue eyes and this kind of wavy hair and a girl and all of those things. So this is because of my past actions, my karma ripened like this, even that, I have the kind of voice I have and all of those things. And that is locked in, stable for this lifetime. I mean, okay, I grow, I age, but I won't now wake up tomorrow and have hazel brown eyes. My eyes will stay blue, right? So you look at your body, you see your past deeds, and then you look at your speech, what you're saying. Are you saying nice things? Are you saying nasty things? That's your present karma you're creating. It will also have a lot to do with how many friends you have. Am I nasty now or am I a nice person? And then look at your mind, at your thoughts to know your future lives, right? So that's what I've heard. You want to know the approximation of where you're going? Look at your mind. Like we said, kichik, from moment to moment, what is the content of your mind? Are you always trying to be kind and peaceful, forgiving, let go, and all of that? Or are you like vengeful and angry and want to, stab the tire of your neighbor because his dog shit in front of your fence again or whatever, So, and again, it's like we all have these moments where you get angry for a moment, but the question is really like how often and what do you do thereafter? Do you nurture that or do you try to go back? We talked about the 4 things of the karma being complete, and the last one is you rejoice. It's like when you get so angry, you're like, oh, I'm gonna stab my neighbor's tire, and then you go like, I better not. Then you didn't rejoice, right? You kind of took it back. You shrank the karma back. What I want you to see also is that all the different topics of Buddhism go together, It's like, it's not like, oh, we did karma, now we're doing Bardo, and they're not related. They are so related, it's like they're the same, right? Because every single thing that happens is another moment of karma ripening and creating new karma. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, Sam?
Maybe you were going to address this in the next part, but you had said that after 7 days in the Bardo, you would die another death, if you're still there. So that's one question. And I think the second is just sort of I don't know, I have the same feeling too, the same sort of like whenever there's a very precise time stamp on something, like 49 days in the Bardo is the maximum that you can. I don't know, there's a part of me that always resists that too, that thinks it's so preposterous to, I don't know, there are other things I can think of. I don't remember the context of something like, you're come into this life and your parents are responsible for 1/17 of your conditioning. So like stuff like that just makes me feel very at odds.
Yes. So, for all practical purposes, it doesn't really matter very much. So I'm not getting hung up on it because the practical thing is like be a good person and help the person who's passing. And then the only effect it has on a practical level is that the Tibetans, after somebody dies, for every 7 days up to the 49th, will do one special puja, which that's nice, whether or not the person is still in the Bardo and whether or not that number is correct, right? So that's why I take it very lightly. That's the only thing you have to take into consideration here. And normally, anybody, when you do puja for somebody, it really supports them so well that they also leave the bardo before that. So, and that's very, it's kind of like the understanding, you just keep on doing the pujas. It's a little bit like in the Catholic Church, you know how you read Mass and then you read Mass for the person who passed 1 year later, right? You may not know, but that's how it is. And it's not because they think the person's still around or is not in heaven. It's just like they pick that time frame, you know, and it feels good, and that's all. I think there's also another aspect, which is that it gives the family something constructive to do and helps them process their grief constructively. So, hey, I'm in. That sounds good to me, you know. So, what is important to understand is that there will be this point in the bardo, if the bardo hasn't managed to go on, that there will be again this experience of my life force is running out and I'm again going through all the dissolutions to the innermost subtle mind and I come back. And the longer you're away from your life, time-wise, the more you forget who you were and your identity changes and frees up to be something different and new, which if you have good karma ripening, that's beautiful. If not, then that becomes scary. So, or can become scary. Yeah. So what I wanted to say is that it's really important to train for death and the Bardo in this life. And how do you train? So you train by catching the in-between moments in your life. So what are in-between moments in your life? It's, for instance, we have a nice saying in German, wie bestellt und nicht abgeholt. It means like ordered and not picked up, you know. You're standing there at the train station and the train isn't coming, you know, and it's just not coming. It's like you've been ordered to be there, but the train isn't coming and you haven't been picked up, you know. So you're suddenly finding yourself in the Bardo in this life. It's like, hey, I was supposed to be a train traveler on my way to X. Instead, I'm hanging out here, like between two things, or waiting in the waiting line, or when things happen that totally take you by surprise and you lose your bearings. You were supposed to go to a conference and speak, but suddenly the health authorities call and say your neighbor has COVID and now you're in quarantine, and suddenly you're in the Bardo in quarantine. Or your house burns down and you were this person, you were a house owner living in that place, and suddenly you're in the Bardo because you're neither a house owner any longer nor are you living in that place any longer, right? So there are all these moments where you're experiencing a kind of a Bardo, an in-between state, mentally, emotionally in this life. And usually then people get annoyed. They get angry and impatient. So if you're a good Buddhist practitioner, you're like, ooh, I get to practice, you know, I get to familiarize myself here with what's coming. So I'm not taken by surprise. So, yeah, so these are very, very good things when you get completely thrown off. Also, when you're bored, you know, you're just sitting there bored. I don't think the Bardo is so particularly interesting, especially if you understand that whatever you perceive is essentially hallucinations of your own mind, you know. So also when you're hallucinating or dreaming or having good and bad dreams, just think like, thank God I woke up, I'm still in my bed, you know, it could have been the Bardo, you know. Let me just take a step back and understand that that was just my mind hallucinating. So there's a lot we can train with. We can also practice dream yoga. That means conscious control over our dreams and being conscious, awake, and aware in our dream world. That is the closest we can get in this life to being in the Bardo. So when you have these kind of dreams where you're dreaming and something weird happens, and you can remember that it's a dream, and you can just say to yourself, you know, it's a dream, I can fly away, or it's a dream. If I say a prayer, I can change the feeling, you know, somebody's about to come and attack you, and you're like, ooh, it's a dream, let me start praying. And then it shifts and it becomes a pleasant experience in the dream. So this is how we can take this life to prepare. You know, this was also supposed to be a class, or the request for this class came from a place of, I'm scared of dying. From a Buddhist perspective, that's a healthy attitude, you know, you'd better be scared. I'm always amazed nowadays, you know, it's like in Christianity, people are no longer allowed to talk about hells because hells is not scientific, but somehow paradise is, because now everybody assumes they never practiced, they weren't particularly generous, they hardly ever went to church, but we're all going to paradise. Why are we all going to paradise? Why got only the hells abolished and not paradise as well then? I mean, by sheer logic, if one is a hoax, the other one should be a hoax as well, right? So anyhow, we should be frightened, but not feel helpless. We should say, whatever time I have left here, I will use it to prepare myself. Like if you want to go climb Mount Everest, you should go hiking every day to build the muscles. So we're using this life now to build the muscles to prepare for death. And yeah, I wanted to talk more from the perspective of it happens to me, because I'm talking to the person who requested from the place of this scares me. But I think from talking about it like that, you'll understand also in your mind how to pray and help a person who has passed. There was a question last time in karma class, like, can we purify others' karma? Not really, but we can create positive karma for a person. I can create positive karma. It's like earn money. I can earn 10,000 and give it to Sam, right? Here, I made this money, this good energy, and I'm giving it to you as a gift. It's yours now. We can do that with our merit, with our good karma. I can save somebody's life and say, that karma of saving a life, I'm giving that karma to somebody who is dying right now, right? May their life be saved, or may they travel safely across the treacherous sea of the Bardo, right? There are all these nice poems about these things. So what you can do and what the Tibetans will do is, for instance, say, we take all the clothes that the person left behind, we give them to the poor, and that good karma we dedicate to the person who's now in the Bardo, for them to have safe travels through the treacherous, wild, stormy sea of the Bardo into a good rebirth. So you can do good deeds, or you can give 10,000 to the temple, or you can give all your gold away, or whatever you want, right? So then you can do so many good deeds, whatever it is that you wish. And the nice thing is that, like, if I now earned 10,000 and gave the 10,000 to Sam, she'll be happy with the 10,000. And on top of that, I will have created more good karma to have more money come towards me because I practice true generosity. So not this kind of like a tit for tat, or I'll give 10,000 to Sam, so I win the lottery for 10,000 or 100,000. That's transactional. If it's a true gift, true generosity, where you know I'm giving it away, no strings attached. So if you do those kind of good deeds in the name of a person who is in the process of dying or has just died, that's very powerful and helpful to them. Good. Any more questions? Okay, so I don't know what happened to Michelle and Preeti. Maybe they just have to reduce data. I wanted to, at the end of this class, invite you to just meditate on the experience of the Bardo from the point of the view of the open teachings, which is the so-called exoteric teachings, not the esoteric teachings, right? So you can make yourself comfortable and maybe close your eyes if that feels better to you. So let's just, because otherwise I would have to redo the whole death meditation. Let's just imagine you're driving your car and suddenly there's a boom, like an explosion. And next thing you're finding yourself, you're floating above the car and you're seeing the accident. You're seeing your body lying over the steering wheel and not moving, and you're drifting further and further away. You kind of see that people there are screaming, shouting, but you're drifting more and more away. And you realize, I did my training. I may have died. I may be in a coma right now, but I may actually have died. And try to just stay with the feeling of being at peace, saying, whether I'm in a coma or dying, let me just let go of everything that was and remember my faith in the good and the light. So let's just pretend it's Buddhism. Let me just remember my practice. And you start to think of whichever aspect of the enlightened mind in the form of a Buddha you familiarized yourself with. So, for example, think of Shakyamuni Buddha, golden statue, sitting cross-legged, holding his begging bowl. And you just feel such golden light and love coming from Shakyamuni Buddha. And you think, this is the moment to forget about everything that binds me to my life or my body. You can take a moment to feel it and think like, this is nice. I don't feel pain. I don't feel heavy. I feel nice and floaty. And I'm now going to go towards the heart of the Buddha. So you visualize that this golden light that represents love and wisdom comes from the heart of the Buddha. And you travel towards it and you try to merge with it. And then try to spend a moment as long as you can just in that light, thinking nothing, just feeling happy and full of love. And when that becomes uncomfortable because your mind wants to have thoughts, remember the teachings that say at that point you think, I'm in the Bardo right now, but in order to be helpful for other beings, let me take a good human rebirth where I can be a helpful human and help as many other beings as I possibly can. And then pray that such a rebirth will be coming towards you. And this would be super fast. So probably you'll get disturbed now by realizing that something is happening to your body, or in-laws screaming and crying, and then think again, I let go, I'm floating, I don't have pain. I remember the love and light of the Buddha's heart and mind. And I'm going towards a good human rebirth where I can be helpful for others. You can repeat that in and out. And then when the rebirth comes, this moment of an apparition of parents and this feeling of getting stuck suddenly, like an insect that gets stuck on a sticky surface. In that moment to think, now I've taken rebirth, and may I take this entire life to be helpful for others and do good deeds. Okay. That was just an idea to how you can do it. You can choose whichever form you would like to give it. Any questions? Yes, Sam?
I do feel properly terrified from the karma teachings and the Bardo teachings. Um, so I just wondered if you had any guidance, just in terms of some balance of. I appreciate the terror. That's fine. I take that as like lovely motivation, but just in terms of sort of an onward leading, so I don't, no pun intended, I don't stop dead in my tracks from further
No,
study. Just
yeah. So this feeling of being terrified is supposed to be generated. It's a spiritual realization. So first of all, rejoice, like yay! I realized this is terrifying, and it's a spiritual realization. And by force of that realization and me rejoicing about it, I create a lot of good karma, and I dedicate that towards having a safe passage in the Bardo, right? So the next thing is, what is lovely about this for me in Buddhism is it's in my hand. God doesn't punish me by making me being reborn as a starving baby in Sudan. It's in my hand. right? So if I do the right actions, I can navigate myself. I'm my own captain on this ship, right? So then the other thing is, like, if you really understand good karma, you don't need to make offerings of gold and silver, because you can just keep on wishing good things, right? So you don't have to give 1 million to the temple. I'm just saying that because that's the classical Asian thing to do, right? You can just continuously go around and have thoughts like, may everybody have a peaceful death at home in their own bed, surrounded by their loved ones. May every single being have a peaceful, quiet time in the Bardo. May every single sentient being have a wonderful human rebirth. And then what you can do is, if you don't have gold and silver to give away, you give away your good merit. So your good karmic energy. You're in New York. Give the next old beggar lady 50 cents and say, by that merit, not just I, but may we all have peaceful deaths and good rebirths. You can also give away your past good deeds. So you had countless lifetimes, you must have done some good things somewhere along the lines. You dedicate that merit. You say, by every single good deed I've done, may I, and we don't ever want to be selfish. So it's always like I and everybody else, or everybody else and also I, have a peaceful death and a good human rebirth. And then you can rejoice. It is said that if you rejoice, we're back to the numbers, you get 7% of the good karma of the thing you're rejoicing about. So then you've just gained another 7% of interest, and you can dedicate that again. You can keep going with that, right? So that then we're back to this whole thing of like, how do you engineer your karma? How do you maximize good karmic energy? You know, which has a lot to do with motivation and dedication, which is kind of like, and rejoicing. And then I want to say it the other way around. You know, when we went to Haiti right after the earthquake, I mean, I was there at the time when the first airplanes were allowed back in Haiti. And, you know, the earthquake had cracked the runway. You know, there were like these big cracks in the earth. I mean, deep down where it was a very bumpy landing. On top of that, there was no electricity. It was in the pitch black dark. I just remember the plane going down, 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 down for like 20 minutes. I'm like, so next we're going to fall into the ocean or what? Because the runway in Port-au-Prince airport starts directly. I mean, the water's here and the runway, whoosh, it's like if you've ever landed in San Francisco, you know, like that kind of a landing. And you couldn't see anything. It was pitch black. I was always like, no star, no earth, pitch black. We're going down, 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 down. Not so reassuring. And then finally we landed. It was like, pong, 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 over all the cracks. And then there was like, okay, there's some hangar there with a little bit of a light. That's where we passed customs. And it was already this incredible stench of rotting dead bodies, and it was unbelievable. And then we ran the clinic. And then when I was back, everybody was like, oh my God, aren't you totally traumatized? And it hadn't occurred to me because, first of all, I hadn't been through the horrors of the earthquake. And secondly, we were doing good things all the time. You know, we were just helping, 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 helping. I mean, I shouldn't be traumatized helping. You know, it's because I had the skill to put my mind on helping, not on being traumatized. And you also have to let go other sentient beings. You know, I know some of you are still dealing with loved ones passing. We can't control their karma. They can control their karma. And if they screwed up their karma, there is this moment you can try to help them across the bridge, and then the thread rips and they're off into another lifetime, and you can't help them anymore. And the karma is, they are the own engineers of their own karma again. You can keep them in their prayers, you can still send them good karmic energy, but that is how it is in life. We can only really control our own fate. And so the whole Hades story was supposed to mean the skill is to keep your mind on the good you're doing, not on the bad or everything else that may be distracting, right? And that's a whole nother thing. It's like, how do you turn everything into this amazing positive karma creating event? You know, I was lucky enough to study for decades with Lama Rinpoche, who like wore us all out with the way he was praying and dedicating and visualizing. It's like mind-boggling. But you know, I mean, how he could take every single last thing and make it into an occasion and a meditation where you make so much karma, you must get enlightened kind of day after tomorrow. It's a skill. So whether or not what you do with your mind, that's the whole point of how good a practitioner are you. So yeah, that's my answer to that. Any more questions? So in like what I just said, so I'm just translating it for psychotherapists. So for psychotherapists, that skill is resilience, you know. And so we say, well, some people have more resilience than others. In psychotherapy, the Buddhists would say, well, some people come with better karmic imprints and predisposition than others. Like, why can some people turn trauma into an amazing life and others are crushed and become negative and start to kill, you know? Good. That was my class on the Bardo. I think I gave you enough food for thoughts. If I give you more food for thoughts, you might get a stomach ache and digestive issues. So just let it sit. This chew it over for a long time to come. Yeah? Good. And